A single slap. One moment of raw hatred caught on camera. But what happened when that elderly black man pulled out his phone and made one call would shake an entire town to its core, force a cover-up into the light, and prove that sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. It wears a worn cardigan and carries the quiet strength of a man who refused to be silent. This is the story of how one veteran's dignity became a reckoning no one saw coming. The morning fog clung to the fields surrounding Millbrook, Kansas, like a secret the town wasn't ready to tell. Along the main road, pickup trucks rumbled past storefronts that had stood unchanged for decades. At the heart of it all sat Miller's Cafe, where the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon drew farmers and locals every morning like clockwork. Robert Hayes pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming softly above his head. At 72, he moved with deliberate care, his navy cardigan buttoned against the autumn chill. Pinned to his chest, an American flag caught the overhead lights, a small glint of pride he wore every day. He'd earned it in jungles far from Kansas, in battles that left scars no one could see. He chose his regular seat by the wall, where he could watch both the door and the room. Old habits from his service days never quite left. Setting down his weathered wallet, he began counting coins, a ritual the staff knew well. Maria Santos approached with a warm smile, coffee pot in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." The usual. "Thank you, Maria. Black coffee and wheat toast, please." She poured carefully, her practiced movements smooth and kind. Maria had worked at Miller's for 3 years, and she'd learned that Mr. Hayes appreciated respect more than small talk. As she turned toward the kitchen, she noticed the man in the corner booth, his eyes fixed on Robert with an intensity that made her uneasy. Derek Morrison sat hunched forward, his work shirt stretched tight across broad shoulders. He hadn't touched his coffee in 20 minutes. Outside, 3 cigarette butts lay crushed near the doorway, evidence of his agitation before entering. At 38, Derek carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed Millbrook belonged to him and people like him. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation. Farmers discussed wheat prices. Office workers scrolled through phones. No one sensed the storm gathering in that corner booth where Derek's knuckles whitened around his cup. Robert pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating a new message. "Big meeting at Justice today. Wish me luck, Dad. Love you." He smiled, typing slowly with careful fingers. "Always proud of you, son. Do what's right." Few people in Millbrook knew that Robert's son, James Hayes, served as the United States Attorney General. Robert never mentioned it, never dropped it into conversation. It was simply a private joy he carried quietly, like the flag on his chest. Across the cafe, Derek's jaw clenched. To him, Robert's presence represented everything wrong with Millbrook. Change, outsiders, the erosion of what he called tradition. For months, he'd muttered complaints to anyone who'd listen. But complaints weren't enough anymore. Outside the window, David Brooks adjusted his camera tripod. The 21-year-old film student had chosen Miller's Cafe for his documentary about small-town America. He wanted to capture the simple rhythms of rural life, the faces of people whose stories rarely made headlines. He had no idea his camera was about to record something far different. Maria glanced nervously between Robert and Derek as she refilled sugar dispensers. She'd heard Derek's racist remarks before, always spoken loud enough for Robert to hear, quiet enough to maintain deniability. But today felt different. Today, Derek wasn't hiding behind muttered words. Robert sipped his coffee, his calm eyes taking in the room. He noticed the new security camera mounted above the counter. He noted the emergency exits, the layout of tables, the positions of people. Military training never fully faded, even in peacetime. Derek's chair scraped back suddenly. The harsh sound cut through conversations. Heads turned. He stood, boots heavy on the tile floor, and walked toward Robert's table with deliberate steps. The cafe fell silent. Maria's hand froze on the coffee pot. Fire Chief Reynolds, sitting in the back, straightened in his seat. Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, looked up from her newspaper, her face draining of color. Derek's shadow fell across Robert's table. The older man looked up, meeting his eyes with steady composure. "You look real comfortable here, Hayes." Derek's voice carried across the silent room. Robert said nothing. He simply set down his coffee cup with gentle precision and folded his hands on the table. "I said," Derek leaned closer, "you look too comfortable. People like you don't belong in Millbrook." The words hung in the air like poison. Maria's eyes widened. David outside shifted his camera focus, instinct telling him something terrible was unfolding. Robert remained seated, his voice low and even. "I'm just having coffee. I'm not bothering anyone. You're bothering me." Derek's hands clenched into fists. "And that's enough." Fire Chief Reynolds half rose from his seat, but hesitation held him back. Years of avoiding confrontation, of keeping the peace by looking away, now paralyzed him when it mattered most. Robert stood slowly. Despite his age, he rose with dignity, his back straight, shoulders squared. For a moment, he seemed taller than the younger man looming before him. "I don't want trouble," Robert said quietly. "I'll leave if that's what you need." He moved to step around Derek, but the younger man shifted, blocking his path. It was a deliberate act of dominance, a show of power for everyone watching. "You don't leave until I say you can," Derek snarled. Then, without warning, he shoved Robert hard in the chest. The older man stumbled backward, catching himself against the table. Cups rattled. A plate crashed to the floor, shattering. Coins from Robert's wallet scattered across the tiles, ringing as they rolled. Gasps erupted throughout the cafe. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Outside, David's camera captured everything through the window, his hands shaking but his lens steady. Robert steadied himself, one hand pressed against the table edge. His face flushed from the impact, but his eyes remained calm, refusing to give Derek the fear he wanted. "That's assault," Fire Chief Reynolds called out, finally finding his voice. But he didn't move to intervene. Derek ignored him, stepping closer to Robert. "People like you need to learn your place." The cafe held its breath. Maria fumbled for her phone, hands trembling as she opened the camera app. She aimed it at the two men, knowing instinctively that what happened next needed to be recorded. Mrs. Patterson sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. She'd heard the rumors about Derek's behavior, heard her husband the mayor dismiss complaints as exaggeration. Now she witnessed the truth, and it made her sick. Robert drew a slow breath, then straightened again. He met Derek's glare without flinching. "I just want peace. But you've just made a serious mistake." Derek laughed, harsh and mocking. "A mistake? You're just an old man. Nobody cares about you." The words were barely out of his mouth when his hand swung up and cracked across Robert's face. The slap echoed through Miller's cafe like a gunshot. The gold ring on Derek's finger cut into Robert's cheekbone, and a thin line of blood appeared dark against his skin. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Fire Chief Reynolds surged to his feet. Maria sobbed, but kept filming, her phone capturing every horrifying second. Outside, David's camera recorded it all. The violence, the blood, the frozen faces of bystanders who did nothing. Robert stood motionless for a heartbeat, his hand rising to his bleeding cheek. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, though trembling slightly, pressed a number at the top of his contacts list. Derek sneered. "Calling the cops? Nobody here's going to take your side, old man." Robert raised the phone to his ear. One ring, two. Then a voice came through, loud enough for the silent cafe to hear. "Dad? Is everything okay?" The voice was deep, authoritative, unmistakably concerned. Robert's voice remained steady. "James, I'm all right, but something's happened. I want you to hear about it directly before it reaches the news." The room froze. That name, James Hayes. Recognition rippled through the crowd. Whispers started. Maria's eyes went wide. James Hayes, the Attorney General of the United States. Derek's smirk faltered. He swallowed hard. "Your son? What, some small-time lawyer?" The voice on the phone came through clearly. "Dad, where are you?" "Did someone hurt you? I can have a team there in 15 minutes." The words cut through the cafe like a blade. Derek's face went pale. The swagger drained from his posture. Robert lifted his chin, looking Derek square in the eye. "A man named Derek Morrison just assaulted me. Everything has been recorded by multiple witnesses." Maria's hands shook violently, but her phone stayed aimed at the two men. Outside, David realized his student documentary had just become something far more significant. Mrs. Patterson pressed her hand against her chest, her breathing rapid. Her husband would never be able to bury this. Derek stumbled backward, the color draining from his face. "Wait, I didn't know. I didn't know who you were. Robert interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "And if I weren't anyone's father, would what you did be acceptable?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. No one answered because everyone knew the truth. James Hayes' voice came through the phone, cold and measured. "Dad, stay exactly where you are. A federal response team and legal unit will be there within 20 minutes. All witnesses need to remain on site for statements." Murmurs swept through the cafe. Several people pulled out their phones, some calling friends, others starting live streams. Within seconds, the hashtag Justice for Robert began trending locally. Maria glanced at her phone screen, her Instagram live viewer count jumping from dozens to hundreds in moments. Derek's hands shook. He backed toward his booth, stammering. "It was just, I didn't mean, it's a misunderstanding." Fire Chief Reynolds stepped forward, his voice heavy with regret and anger. "Derek, you've just destroyed yourself." Robert sat back down slowly, placing his phone on the table, still connected to his son. Blood trickled from his cut cheek, but his posture remained upright, dignified. Mrs. Patterson spoke, her voice breaking. "Derek, you've ruined this town." Through the phone, James's voice came firm. "Dad, I promise you'll have justice. Not because of who I am, but because of what you deserve as a citizen." The cafe erupted in noise. Some people sighed in relief, others wept quietly. Derek slumped into his booth, unable to meet anyone's eyes. In that moment, Miller's Cafe transformed from a simple small-town diner into a stage for a reckoning that had been building for years. But Robert knew this was only the beginning. Outside those walls, Millbrook and the entire nation was about to face a truth it could no longer ignore. Within minutes, the street outside Miller's Cafe filled with onlookers. Cars slowed, drivers craning their necks. The image of Robert Hayes, his weathered cardigan marked with blood, his American flag pin catching the light, spread across social media like wildfire. Inside, witnesses were asked to remain seated. Maria continued live streaming, her viewers now in the thousands. David kept his camera rolling through the window, documenting the aftermath with shaking hands. Sheriff Anderson arrived, her patrol car's lights flashing red and blue. She stepped inside, her expression grim as she surveyed the scene, the shattered plate, the scattered coins, the blood on Robert's face. "What happened here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Maria stepped forward immediately. "Sheriff, I have the whole thing on video. Derek Morrison attacked Mr. Hayes without provocation." Anderson's jaw tightened. She'd known both men for years, but the evidence was impossible to dismiss. She glanced at Derek, who sat hunched and pale. "I need everyone's statements," Anderson said. "No one leaves until we've documented everything." Outside, news vans began arriving. Local reporters, then regional stations. By noon, national networks had picked up the story. Veteran assaulted in Kansas cafe, alleged father of Attorney General. Robert sat quietly, accepting first aid from a paramedic who cleaned and bandaged his cheek. Through it all, his phone remained connected to James, who listened to everything, coordinating responses from Washington. Then came the federal vehicles. 3 black SUVs pulled up, and agents in dark suits emerged, their presence turning Millbrook's quiet Main Street into something from a crime drama. The lead agent, Rebecca Mills, approached Robert with professional courtesy. "Mr. Hayes, we're here under direct orders to ensure your safety and secure all evidence." Derek watched from his booth, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He tried to speak. "I didn't know who he was, I swear. If I'd known—" Agent Mills cut him off with a cold stare. "Mr. Morrison, your knowledge of Mr. Hayes's family connections is irrelevant to the assault you committed." Fire Chief Reynolds approached Mills quietly. "Agent, there's something you should know. This isn't Derek's first incident. There have been complaints before." Mills's eyes sharpened. Were they documented? Reynolds' silence was answer enough. At Millbrook City Hall, Mayor Patterson received the call from Sheriff Anderson. As she described the situation, his hands began to shake. He knew Derek Morrison's family, knew their connections to local development projects. He'd dismissed previous complaints, calling them misunderstandings. Now those choices were coming back to haunt him. "Patricia," he said desperately, "we need to contain this before the media turns it into something bigger." Through the phone, Anderson's voice was flat. "Sir, it's already bigger. The Attorney General is involved." In Washington, James Hayes stood in his office, still connected to his father's phone. His staff gathered around him, faces tense. On his computer screen, Maria's live stream played, showing his father sitting calmly while federal agents moved through the cafe. "I want a full civil rights investigation," James said, his voice brooking no argument, "not just into this incident, but into the pattern of behavior that allowed it to happen." His deputy hesitated. "Sir, there will be accusations of using your position for personal benefit." James turned, his eyes hard. "My father was assaulted because of racism. That's not personal, that's systemic, and it ends now." Back in Millbrook, Agent Mills began reviewing the video evidence, Maria's live stream, David's camera footage, the cafe's security system. Each angle showed the same truth, an unprovoked attack on an elderly man. But as Mills reviewed the security system's main server, her expression darkened. "Sheriff Anderson, who has access to this system? City IT manages it," Anderson replied. "Why?" "Because someone attempted to delete today's footage. They failed, but they tried." The revelation sent a chill through the room. This wasn't just assault, it was an attempted cover-up. Mrs. Patterson, still sitting in the cafe, heard this exchange. Something broke inside her. She'd spent years looking away from her husband's moral compromises, telling herself it was political necessity. But this was deliberate obstruction of justice. She stood, her voice shaking but clear. "Agent Mills, I believe my husband may have been contacted immediately after the assault. Derek Morrison's family has significant influence in town development. There may be communications you'll want to review." The cafe went silent. Mayor Patterson's own wife had just offered evidence against him. Mills nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll need a formal statement." Derek finally understood the magnitude of his situation. He wasn't just facing assault charges. He was at the center of a federal civil rights investigation with potential conspiracy implications. As evening fell, Robert remained in the cafe, now converted into a temporary command center. Federal agents took statements. Evidence was catalogued. The media circus outside grew larger. Through it all, Robert sat calmly, occasionally sipping water, his hand resting on his phone. When Maria approached, tears streaming down her face, he spoke gently. "Thank you for being brave," he said. Your video might save others from what I experienced." Maria nodded, unable to speak. Outside, David packed up his camera equipment, his documentary project completely transformed. What he'd captured would be studied in journalism schools, cited in legal briefs, and remembered as the moment a small town's silence was shattered. As night fell over Millbrook, Robert finally stood to leave. Federal agents escorted him to a secure location, but before he departed, he turned to look at Miller's Cafe one last time. The building looked the same as it had that morning, but everything had changed. Robert touched the flag pin on his cardigan, feeling its familiar weight. He'd worn this pin for years as a quiet statement of service and sacrifice. Today, it had become a symbol of something larger, the truth that dignity could not be stripped away by violence, and justice, though delayed, could still arrive. The investigation that followed would uncover years of discrimination hidden beneath Millbrook's polite surface. But that night, as Robert was driven away under federal protection, he allowed himself a moment of weary hope. One slap had exposed a system, one phone call had brought it crashing down, and one elderly veteran in a cardigan had reminded America that courage doesn't retire.